Semi-natural landscape types. Semi-natural grasslands can also be referred to as cultural heritage landscapes or just shortly traditional landscapes. They have, due to different times, been classified in very different ways, and if you read literature about them, then you will stumble into a lot of different kind of classifications. Simply spoken, we can say that they could be divided into wooded biotopes and open biotopes. There is also a traditional division, which divides them into more, which are sandy, dry pine forest areas with heather, then dry meadows, which could be subdivided into rocky meadows. So rocky meadows could also be stony meadows. So you can see the rock and the stones there. Meadow could be subdivided into coastal meadows, which could also be in English seaside meadows. And when we talk about the sea in Finland, it's always the Baltic Sea. Then we have bog meadows and flooded meadows. The forest is divided into forest meadows and forest pastures. So the forest meadow have more light and grass and more different blooming plants than the forest pasture. Natura 2000 is a network established in EU, so you have these Natura 2000 protection areas all over EU, and they have their own classification with code numbers of different biotopes. And here you can see the main headlines for the classification for Finland. We don't have all nature types, so there are tremendously many different kinds of nature types in EU, but these are the ones we have in Finland. So Baltic Sea and the coast area, inland water bodies, heather, meadow and bushes, mountain Lapland, bogs, Rocky Mountain types and forests. Then different authorities in Finland have also had their own classifications, and here we will have a look at Syke, which was the former environmental agency, now a part of ELY centers today, and we have Metsähallitus, which was kind of forest board of Finland, and today takes care and manage the state-owned forest, for example, the nature protection areas in Finland. As you can see now, quite quickly, there are different differences in these, but mainly they are more or less the same. We can see here that it's something called wooded meadows, and then you can start to think, okay, what's the difference between wooded meadows and forest pastures? And wooded meadows don't usually have spruces and pine. So they are more lush, more fresh, more moisture, and there is more grass and only these broad-leaved trees. You find wooded meadows only in southwestern Finland, around Turku area and on Åland Islands, also in the Turku archipelago. So typically oak, alder, there can be hazelnut bushes, of course also birch and other leaf trees. Metsähallitus have then also something called former fields, because a lot of old agricultural fields have been planted with forest, replanted, so they are kind of category for themselves because there grows usually also a lot of grasses in those forests. And gardens, so the farm gardens can be pretty big, and often also pasture areas may have been close up to the farm center. And new environments, it's new environments that recently have been built. If we have a look at semi-natural landscapes or semi-natural grasslands, and this is two different sources from 2003, and you can see that both are divided into wooded and open meadow types, but there are several differences. In Priha's work, you can see that alder meadows are separated as a separated group, which they are not in Jääskeläinen's classification. And if you have then a look at the open meadows, then in Jääskeläinen's work, those who are on mineral soil meadows, they are both the dry and the fresh and the wet ones are all gathered under that headline, whereas then the coastal meadows, which is the riverside, lakeside and seaside meadows, are under one category. Flooded meadows separately and bog meadows separately as the more. So all of these different kinds of classifications people use when they are writing about semi-natural landscapes. Some years later, 2008 and 2018, we can see a pretty stable classifications looking like this. There is not any subdivisions here. All are on the same line, so to say. The more the rocky, the dry meadows that are very close to each other. We have the fresh meadow with a little bit more water, it becomes a wet meadow. Then we have the lake and riverside meadows and the coastal meadows and the flooded meadows, all different types, but all are very wet, as is also the bog meadow. And then three different types of the wooded ones. The wooded meadow with only the leaf trees, and then the forest meadow, which has more light than the forest pastures. Easy. No, it's not easy at all. If we now look at the Finnish Nature 2000 nature types, we can see that under the headlines there is a lot of things going on. So under the headline of Baltic Sea and the coasts, we have wide range of different types. The code numbers refers now to the EU Natura 2000, so they are actually more or less kind of standard, we could say. It may be that a meadow under one number in different countries actually then also looks a little bit different, but this is the system that they have come up with in EU in order to try to understand each other when we are talking with each other. But of course then each professionals in their own country, they know their meadows and their semi-natural grasslands the best. And in Finland, we have also one own classification used by Metsähallitus, and it goes into very details. So here, this classification is based on what kind of plants, one plant or several plants that are in that specific habitat. So, for example, if we have a look at inland lakeside meadows, you can see that there are a lot of different divisions and even subdivisions under these, and they are then focusing on what kind of plants are growing in that specific area. There is a second page of the seaside meadows. In the same way, it goes after what kind of plants there are growing. Here is still the rest of this classification with flooded meadows and forested meadows and pastures. You find a lot of moors in many different countries. You find them in Scotland, you find them in Denmark, Norway, and in Finland ours are not that open and not that big. We have usually pine trees growing in our moors. This very picture is from Kola Peninsula in northwest Russian, and this is a typical landscape of a moor. They are on dry, sandy soil growing. There is a lot of cultural heritage connected to moors. They have been grazed by cattle traditionally, and for example in Norway they have been burning them regularly as well. And you find a wide range of information on moors if you try to look at it. Rocky meadows or stony meadows. We have some parts with rocky and stony meadows. One of them is Vartiovuori, but the grazing of these areas with sheep stopped in 1970s, and after that only the lower part have been grazed with cattle occasionally. It means that the plants that are growing here have been dying out. There is still something left, and there is now more thick grasses that would really need to be grazed. A new typical picture of how it looks like when the grazing have stopped. The valuable plants that are used to grow, such as strawberries, wild strawberries, they are not growing here anymore. Sticky catchflower is still growing here. It's a little bit higher plant, so it have survived the longest. But you can see down here in the left corner that the fern is now entering. And the fern will most likely then take over the whole area if we will not manage to graze it again. This area is very difficult to graze with cattle, because the hillside is very steep and there is a risk that the cattle perhaps will fall down, and that's why we have been grazing only the lower part of the area. This area really would need to be grazed by sheep. Meadows. Example of dry meadows. It can be on more sandy soil, or it can be on rocky soil where the soil cover is thinner. And on these dry meadows there are usually a lot of flowering plants. Very often you cannot classify one whole meadow as one biotope type. So also in this meadow here there were parts that were very dry, and then there were parts that were very wet. In the wetter parts there were growing, for example, orchids, but up in the drier parts they had very dry part meadow plants. And again, one more example, this from Karelia, with these stones visible, and then drier plant cover around these stony parts. If you go further away from here, then you will get more moisture, and you can see it also on the green color here, that down here is more moisture and you have an other plant cover here. Meadow. Meadow has more nutrients and more water available than the drier parts. And here on this picture from Mustiala, you can see that this upper part are more drier meadow types, whereas down here it is more a fresh type of meadow. Actually here in the middle you can see that raspberries have started to grow, and this is also a very problematic plant that can start to take over these parts, and again one reason why you should graze this area. The fresh meadow type from Norway. A fresh type of meadow from Estonia with Primula veris. It is among the first plants blooming in the summer. It's also a fresh type of meadow, also from Kiltsi meadow in Estonia. And here you can see Anthylus vulneraria. It used to be pretty common in Finland on meadows before, but nowadays it has become pretty rare. And this fresh meadow type is from Vershininan in Kenjärvi National Park in Russia. And the photo is taken in late August. Most of the flowers have already been blooming, so mostly grasses left. I can mention here in connection with this picture that what happened here is that the dog was attacking the sheep. And you can see that the sheep have gone together as a group, and now the cattle, they interfered into this and they went towards the dog and chased the dog away. One more picture of a fresh meadow from Estonia. This is also a limestone meadow, and that's why you have this tremendously big amount of flowering flowers. And the orchid you can see on this picture is Gymnadenia conopsea. A fresh meadow from Lithuania, and I think that this is now an area that has been abandoned, so it's not a managed semi-natural grassland anymore. And you can see here a big amount of Viscaria vulgaris, who is blooming all over. And it's very typical for meadows that just before they start to, so to say, to die out, they may bloom really a lot. So they are really trying to give all that they have in order to survive and set seeds before the grasses are taking over and all the different species are then being conquered by the grasses. Meadows. Wet meadows in Finland are mostly smaller parts of other types of meadows, at least in the southern Finnish parts. Wet meadows may stay wet for most of the summer as well. This is from Untamala semi-natural landscapes, and here you can see it's late in autumn taking this picture, but you can see the water that is laying here. Also from the grasses you can see here that it's a very, very wet area. Something similar we can see in Mustiala as well. Some part of Seppä pasture is also very wet. It's close to the small stream Riuskanoja here, and there are actually two different parts with these very wet areas in this biotope. So this wet area here, it is where groundwater occasionally rise so high. It's at the bottom of an ancient valley, and the soil here is very black, and some years it is pretty long in May and in June. It may be very wet in this area. You cannot actually see anything specific when you look at the picture, but yes, when you would walk here, it could be wet. And in this area occasionally also grows a type of orchid, Dactylorrhizza incarnata, which like to grow in very wet habitats. Side and riverside meadows. Finland have large riverside meadows in northern Finland, and this is from Oulanka Joki River. And many of them are not managed anymore. Some are, being cut the grasses of these meadows. Another picture from the same area, and it looks like it's being in a progress of being nearly transisted into some kind of bog meadow type, so they are close to each other, where areas that were traditionally moved to get hay for cattle for the winter. And here you can see then people who voluntarily are taking care of this area in order to have this biotope surviving. And one more picture also from Oulanka Joki riverside. You can see the water here on the both sides. The river is meandering, it's turning, taking its turns in this lowland, and you can see that the territories, the mountain are going up here in the behind. And in the middle you can also see an old barn where they used to store the hay in. One more picture how the different plant species look like in this type of meadow. This picture is also taken quite late in August, so most of the plants have been flowering already. You may find old constructions of wood that have been used to dry the hay that have been collected in these areas. In the back you can see here already that forests have started to grow in this meadow. Some small spruces here. Here is a well-managed lakeside meadow in Sweden, close to Uppsala. It's being used as a pasture area. You can see that the down parts here are more humid, whereas then here to the right you can see that there are some stones here. It's getting drier when it comes a little bit up here in the terrain. And a lakeside meadow from Kenjärvi National Park, and this is also being grazed by cattle and sheep and horses. Same place, the same lake on another side, where you can see part of the vegetation is open with sand and part is then with grasses, and you can see how the village horses are enjoying themselves. And another lakeside meadow, also from Kenjärvi National Park, and the lower parts are then a little bit more moist, and the higher up you come here, then the more dry or fresh the meadow becomes. It's also a lakeside meadow, and you can see at the lower parts here are more wet. All of them are grazed and some of them are moved, and then you can see that some of the parts cattle have not been eating that much. It's most likely because there are too little animals here. And you can see also that some of these lakeshore parts here are being now overgrown with reed. So immediately as you have a lower pressure of animals grazing, or you are cutting less hay, then this area will become overgrown. And also this village have only few younger people left. It's mostly elderly people who are living here, and most likely the future of this village also will be very different from the picture that you see now, and even today it may be even a higher degree of overgrown areas here. This is a riverside meadow close to Rusne in Lithuania, It's a big river, and it has big low-lying grasslands which are producing very well hay next to this river. Actually, in this area here, it was used to they used to make a very famous cheese in 1930s, and still today, close by on the Kaliningrad side, there is this old traditions of making this cheese, where the cattle then have been grazing on these very big grasslands. Seaside meadows or coastal meadows. The seaside or coastal meadows differs not that much, but Baltic Sea has a kind of salt degree, even if it's brackish water and it's not so high, it's not that salty the water, and often also in the bays there are rivers with fresh water that are running out in the sea, so it's not that dramatical perhaps, the change in these biotopes. This photo is taken from Lenholmen, and you can see that the part of this lower part of this meadow here closer to the seashore has been moved. Another nice example of seaside meadows you find at Jungfruskär. It's in Turku archipelago on an island, and here they are both being moved and grazed. You can see here is a little reed, you can see there is this sand shore here visible, and this is really a nice area for different kinds of birds that want to live and stay in the habitat of close to the sea. Another picture closer up, and the lighter grasses here that you can see. So this is the reed that want to grow here again. So this area is under restoration, and it's being turned now into these different kinds of grass and flower composition, whereas if you don't take care of it, the reed will take over and it will be a totally monoplant area. Another example of a seaside meadow on the western coast of Finland from Kitama Island, and also here they have been trying to minimize the reed. You can still see the reed here up in the corner, how high it is standing here, and you really need to move this area and then have a lot of animals grazing on it to keep this biotope open. Reed in itself is of course not bad, because there is a lot of birds that like to live in the reed. But we have so much reed, and the reed is taking over so many of our biotopes, and that's the reason why we also need to save these old seaside grasslands, because there is a lot of other birds and other insects and other animals that like to live in that one, and those have less and less habitat for themselves nowadays. A well-grazed pasture from Gotland Island, a seaside meadow. This is being grazed by sheep. Other side from the southwestern parts of Gotland, with also very well-grazed seaside meadows. And what you see here are sand dunes that has been overgrown already with grass, so they are all old sand dunes. Now we jump to Estonia, also along the Baltic Sea, and to Matsalu, which is a bay in the Baltic Sea, and there is a river stream coming out here, Kasari River in this area, and also some other smaller streams, and you can see the big moved seaside meadows here. Up picture of cattle at the meadow. This area is very popular for many different types of birds. It's called one of the hotspots for birds in Europe. So they have a lot of migrating birds coming in here springtime and then also resting here before they continue their journey southwards in the autumn. Birds, especially a lot of geese, are here. They are extremely depending on that humans are grazing these areas. So if these areas become overgrown with reed, you can see here some reed also on this picture. So there is no place for the geese to be, and that's when they are moving into the arable fields and are then eating and destroying also a lot of the vegetation of farmers have been cultivating on the fields. And that's why it's so important that the people would keep cattle and sheep in these areas to keep these semi-natural meadows open and have them as a living habitat then for the birds who are migrating from the southern parts of Europe and going up to the tundra areas of Siberia, where they are nesting then summertime. Meadows. Fluted meadows are fluted seasonally, usually then in the spring and in the autumn. This is an example of a fluted meadow that not is managed, and from southern Finland. And you can see the first picture. It is taken in November, and then the following spring, the right picture taken in the start of June. And the river sides are fluted, and here used to be growing also a lot of flowering plants, Europeus trolleus among others before, but nowadays it's not moved anymore and it's not grazed either. So all the meadow plants have been disappearing from this area. Another thing you can see on the picture is the erosion, a lot of water, if it's not covered with plant cover here, so it's very easily for the flooding river to start to eat itself into the bank of the stream. This is an Estonian fluted meadow, and it's groundwater who is rising itself above the soil here. Also, this is a popular geese area where geese are stopping, especially in the springtime, and when they are waiting for the favorable climate to continue to fly up to the north. This area is being moved annually. And summertime, nearly the all water is disappearing. There is a kind of a small, very shallow pond that is left during the most driest period of the year. It's actually a fluted lakeside, and this is from Kishi Island in Karelia, Russia. This is Shishkina, and also these lower parts were then flooded in spring times. And you can see the grass is there also growing. There's growing like more kind of grass, and the cattle have been more pasturing up here, where the greener and eaten parts are like here, and then these parts have been then more wet, where cattle have not, at least early in the spring, they have not gone into this area And often it is so then that then the grass gets overgrown, and then the taste is not that as good for the animals, and they are not, even later on, they are not going that much into that area to graze. Those many bogs in Finland, and Finland has indeed been the land for the bogs, and of the bogs have been both grazed and moved in order to make hay. Here you can see a barn. This is from northern parts of Finland, Salamajärvi bog, and this is then how it looks like. You can see that here is growing a lot of grass. For example, from the same spot, the old barn still standing here in the old bog meadow. The area is not being moved or grazed anymore. Wooded meadow. Here you can see Lenholmen wooded meadow. We saw a picture earlier from this meadow as well, but from more from the lake side, and this is now the higher upper parts, an old oak. You can see juniper here. You can see it's a lot of sunlight here, and here are not any pine and spruces in this area. Meadow, again, a lot of sunlight, again, some dead wood as well, and the oaks and the old oaks as a forest is in Finland quite rare, and oak is a tree that have really a lot of insects and that thrives on them, that like to be on them, and also mosses and lichens may be growing on them. Meadow from Jungfruskär. Again, a lot of light, a lot of broadleaf trees. More picture from the same place. Here it is more dense, the trees. And cattle is grazing these areas at Jungfruskär. The same island, part of these areas are being restored. And you can see from the trees actually that they have been also coppiced. Other island from Revskär, also in the archipelago. And Hanna wooded meadow that also is being restored. Here you can see that there are some very wet parts as well of the meadow. And in the back you can see rocky areas with drier vegetation. This is Nedremma wooded meadow in Estonia. A lot of big trees, a lot of leaves here in the autumn. Meadows. Forest meadow. This example is from Mustiola, from Kyttelännyppylä. And here you can see springtime, a lot of Anemona nemorosa growing. So the forest meadow, how does then the forest meadow, you see the difference between a forest meadow and a wooded meadow. So mainly the soil is more moisture, and it's located then in broadleaf area where broadleaf trees are growing a lot. So here you can already see in the background now that here is growing a lot of spruce and pines as well. Also in this forest meadow there is a lot of juniper, but only few spruce and yeah, some single pine as well in this area. And here is growing also a lot of alder in this area and a lot of old birches. This is also an area where the flying squirrel have been living. Area in start of June. The same area again. Another place, and some places have pretty dense vegetation still here, and but nowadays it is being grazed by cattle annually. Kyttylä in 2007, and these are native Finnish sheep, and here is now mostly dark sheep, only one that is white, but you have these Finn sheep in all different kinds of colors. In Kittama Island on the western coast of Finland. A forest meadow, you could call this, it's most likely a clear cutting of a forest where they have started then to graze it afterwards. So it looks like a pretty new clear cutting, but with time this will also have some trees on it. They have been leaving here some pines in the area. Pasture from Koli in eastern Finland. It's still being grazed by cattle. Here is a lot of both pine and spruce. And you can see the cattle moving here under, and here you can see also that they have got some kind of additional hay to eat. And they make a pretty much tramping here in the forest, so you can see that the soil has been broken here, which again may give for many new plants possibility to germinate. And here you can see from Kittama Island a forest pasture with mostly pines. The same area from another point. Still you can see here is a lot of grasses also. Those alder meadow that is being restored from Finland. Same area from another spot. And also the same area with the alder trees. And some Finn sheep. Alvar limestone meadow from Sweden, from Öland Island. The Alvar limestone meadow, it means that there is very little soil up on the limestone, and these meadows tend to have really high amount of different vascular plants and also rare insects that only thrive in these areas. And you find most of the alvars in Sweden on Gotland and Öland Island, and then there are also some other smaller islands around that have it, and then you find also much of it in Estonia. Of these Alvar limestone meadows have also a lot of ancient archaeological findings. These are type of graves they think they were used for, or they were used for graves. They call them stone ships. And you can see it's very little vegetation here because there is very little soil and a lot of flowering plants. And closer look up here now from Gotland Island, again a lot of different campanulas here. The same spot. And this is mountain meadows at a summer farm in Norway. Härdalssäter in Nordahl is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has these old meadows, and here are the summer farms, so each farm by the coast, down by the coast where they stay the winter, they have their own cottage up here. Nowadays these cottages are used as summer cottages, but at Härdalssäter there is still milking of goats and goats who are grazing the area. A well-grazed mountain meadow. I took this from a train window and I was passing it, and you can see how low the most likely it is the goats who have been eating the trees here to become very low. Some grasslands from a mountain. This is volcanic rocks at Iceland. And another spot also with the views of these semi-natural grasslands on Iceland. These are mostly then grazed by sheep.